This is the Wandering Mike.
Welcome everyone to the Wandering Mike. Today I'm here with Shebana. Hey Shebana, how's it going?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm looking forward very much to this conversation. I think it's going to be a very interesting one for me, and I think it's going to be an inspiring one as well. Um, so to get us started, if you just want to introduce yourself to the people, tell us a little bit about your life, your journey, anything you want.
Mm, God, let me see. My name is Shebana. I was born in India and then moved to the US, and I would say I've been wandering a long time. I kind of like Wandering Mike is a very clever a clever name.
Thank you.
I resonate with the wandering. When I was in my 30s, I was living in New York City, and I realized that, well, if I if my life ended right now and all I knew was city life, I would regret it, I said to myself. And
Right.
I had always wanted to go to Tierra del Fuego down there in Argentina since I was a
Mhm.
kid. And it just began all these journeys in South America, in Argentina, Peru, Bolivia, Mexico. And really, I didn't, it like opened up a whole new part of me. I think that's what travel does. It um, it almost felt like the places I went, there were different parts of me waiting there. You know, that so when there was
That
one part of
makes
me
so
I
much
met that only or like it, that only opened up when I got to Argentina or when I got to Peru. Like that, it felt like.
sense.
And so nowadays what I do, and then I spent like a year and a half in Mongolia. And when I came back, I feel like my life changed because something kind of opened up in me in a very big way. And I really really fell into my art. So I'd always been writing, but I wrote more. I started doing theater. I started writing plays, directing plays. And really, that the stage, I would say, I wrote a solo play, a one woman show called The Good Manners of Colonized Subjects, which is about the impact of colonization, the British and Portuguese colonization of India, but in a felt body way, in an everyday way, how that still lingers in
Mm.
different ways, and also about art and fear. I would say that was significant. It mixed poetry and dance, inspired by flamenco, which I had also started learning, and then Indian dance, which I'd also later in life began. So
Mm.
it was, I would say, that the things of note in the last decade have been finding the stage, loving being on stage, creating one woman shows, and dance. Like I would never have imagined this for myself, the surprise. And it's a different journey. It is a travel, a different kind of traveling.
All right. Um, there's already so much I think that we can talk about, and all these things are interesting. Feel like taking it chronologically might be the easiest way. So let's start from the beginning of your journey, and obviously, travel is a topic that we are very keen on here. Um, so And also, I don't know if you knew that, but I am personally very interested in South America and haven't been yet, but definitely are planning to go to as well. So that makes me even more curious in what you have already experienced there. So you said you started all the way down near Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, and then you saw more places. Um, Maybe if you just want to take us through that in a little bit more detail, what makes you go there? What did you expect? How did it make you feel? How was the whole?
Sure. It was so exciting. I mean, to think that I could just like so many, you know how this is when you travel or when you decide to do something that is a dream.
Mm.
Sometimes everything conspires to make it possible.
Yes.
And I just remember this feeling of like, I got this grant actually for the promise shown in one short story. Okay. So that's when I knew I had a little bit of money to go.
Mm.
Like, and then I got another grant. I mean, suddenly I was financed for a couple of months, like, so I didn't have to worry. So that was one thing that happened. Then I gave up my apartment, put things in 2 suitcases, put one in storage, and took one in my hand. And I had, when I was young in India, read about Argentina, about the Pampas, and uh, and I must have read about Tierra del Fuego, the land of smoke, Tierra del Fuego. It's an island
Yes.
off the coast of Argentina. That's where I went because there's also Chilean Tierra del Fuego, but I went to the Argentine
Mm.
Tierra del Fuego, and I went. I did research, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to this city that's called Ushuaia, which is the capital of Argentine Tierra del Fuego, and so And I also signed up for one thing, which I had never done because I had grown up in cities. I hadn't really gone on a hike, like, overnight, like for a week with a guide kind of thing.
Right.
So I found a place that you went for a week with a guide across the different landscapes of Tierra del Fuego because the Andes goes through Tierra del Fuego. They change direction. There's a branch of the Andes Mountains in Tierra del Fuego.
Mm.
Then they also have like bog, like Middle Earth, which I realized I felt like I was in Lord of the Rings before the movies came out, but it was like this, there was bog and then there's rivers and all of this. So those are the two things I signed up for, and that feeling of I spent all in all, I spent like 2 months actually, but within the first 2 weeks of getting there, it was October. So it was the
Mm.
beginning of spring in the Southern Hemisphere.
Right.
I went on October 14th. I remember that date because it was such an important date in my life when things, when you're doing something so big and different. Um,
Mhm.
and in Ushuaia, there are many people who have moved there from other parts of Argentina because the government had made it like given it a tax incentive. I think you either don't pay income tax or sales tax, some kind of tax. It was like a tax-free haven. So a
Right.
lot of people had moved from other parts of Argentina to Tierra del Fuego. In many ways, like felt like people were starting over there, go
Mm.
to the end of and the other exciting thing was, so it's like the end of the world, fin de mundo. You see that everywhere. Tierra del Fuego. It's the southernmost. Ushuaia is the southernmost city in the world, and so you could get a stamp on your passport about that, like this
Oh,
end
yeah.
of the world, and the actually the motto of Ushuaia, which is a play on the end of the world, is they say the end of the world, the beginning of everything.
I like that.
Yeah, because the same sense of like so many people were had gone there to start over. Um, so in the way these things happen, I went on and I think that was the landscape. I don't, there's something so remarkable about that landscape of Tierra del Fuego. There are these ancient beech forests, massive trees that have a lichen hanging from them that are called barba de vieja, like the beards of old men, or could be women too, but I think it's called barba de viejo. And um, I remember the feeling of walking in those forests with a guide, and then we would come to like this still lake, I mean, I remember drinking water from a lake, it's rare to be able to do that, but we did. And there was a bird, it was called a garza bruja, like a witch. I think garza must be stork or something, I forget, but it was like this at night. The feeling of being in Tierra del Fuego at night, out in that landscape, next to a still lake, uh, and the sound of that bird and a moon is a very vivid memory for me.
Do you think that that is something that we don't really get anymore nowadays if we live in cities, that just raw, untouched connection with nature?
I mean, for me, I've lived most recently, like I was almost 2 years in a city in Spain. I was studying
Mm.
flamenco and I really loved it. And also, I realized that for me, it's very difficult to live in cities anymore. It's,
Right.
I feel like, but I mean, I do feel in general we have lost our connection to nature. Even I'm not saying I live in a rural part of New Mexico now, so nature is all around me.
Mm.
Even then, cultivating an everyday relationship with nature is a discipline,
Yes.
even when you live in nature, because um, I feel I'm accustomed to go fast. If I spend a lot of time on my computer, for example, I find it harder to slow down in general. Like,
Mm.
I don't know if you notice that. Like, it's like the adrenaline of touching electronic things a lot. It gets into your body and it's really hard to slow down.
I definitely feel that. I don't know if I would contribute that only to technology or even even more to like urban areas in general. I just related a lot to the story you told because right now I'm here in Queenstown, New Zealand, which actually is pretty similar to where Tierra del Fuego actually is considered of the southness of it all. So we also have these beach forests actually, and we have a lot of very stunning nature. And um, I do feel that living here in Queenstown, when everything gets pretty busy and it's a tourist town, and you just have that high energy, everything, and then you step out of the city for a bit, you go to the lake, and you're surrounded by all the nature. Um, I really feel that difference. And what I wanted to say is that I really experienced that New Zealand, compared to all the other countries I've been to before, they actually really respect their nature. So I feel like it's the only country I've been to yet that actually does that. So I feel like, yeah, maybe in the United States it's the same. We don't really value our nature the way we really should.
I think it's up to us, I feel, each of us, I'm saying, even as you live in nature, it takes a discipline to go out, be in it, cultivate a relationship to it, sit under a tree, look at the bark, look at the leaves, and to slow down, to connect into it. And yeah, I think I just think you're right. It's more than just technology. It's just the pace of living in the world that it just takes effort, I think, to go slow.
Mm. What would you say in your journey then through South America in general for now, during those travels, because you said you went to all these different places. What were some other lessons that you took away from traveling there?
Well, after Argentina, what happened was I was going to go to Chile. I still want to do this journey. I was going to take a boat
Mm.
from Punta Arenas there further south and go up the coast of Chile along the fjords
Right.
and go to this island called Chiloé, which I had heard a
Mm.
lot about. And actually, there were people from Chiloé and Chile working in Argentina, in mostly like in the estancias. And so that was my idea. Um, and I still, like I said, want to do it one day. But what happened was someone said, "Oh, um, I have a friend who has a hotel in Peru in this place called Urubamba. It's called the Valle Sagrado de los Incas, that area.
Mm.
And they're looking for someone to stay in the hotel, write in English for the website, and go on cultural expeditions with a
Oh,
guide."
what that sounds perfect, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was. It's these things that happen that you would never think would happen, but it happens
Yeah.
once you get on the road, and things happen. So I will tell you that being in Peru was very different because there in that part of Peru, there I encountered the indigenous Quechua culture, and that was such a so to listen to Spanish and Quechua. Those who speak Quechua have been described as descendants of the Incas, this very old language, and um, the redness of that Mm, of the earth in Peru. I still remember how red colored it was, after Argentina. Like, it was a different
Yeah.
feeling. And to go to all these sort of megalithic, these stone monuments. So Machu Picchu, certainly I went to at that time, but
Right.
also because there was a lot of people there. But I went to many other uh, sites that like names like Pisa, Ollantaytambo. I remember very much, I think it was Pisac, which is a small village about an hour and a half, maybe from Urubamba, which has Incan ruins at the very top. And
Mm.
it was very different, these ruins, say like these sacred places. There were sacred sites, but everything was open to nature, say, unlike you might say, a church or a mosque, which is its own world. These sacred places
Mm.
were open to nature and geometric. And there was a geometry about the stones, and there was
Mm.
flowing water. And I especially remember Pisac because on the very top are these ruins, or where were once sacred spaces, what is left of stone spaces. And then in the town, the small town, there was a massive tree in the main square that looked like a banyan tree in India. One of those trees with the roots hanging down,
Oh, yeah.
like massive, massive trunk with hanging roots, and also roots on the ground spreading very, very far. And there was a plaza. And in this plaza, I think it was every Sunday, there would be uh, a market, a food market. And what was striking about it is that different people who lived high up in the mountains would come down, to trade, to sell things that you could only get from high up in the mountain, maybe certain fruits and certain vegetables. And so I just remember that feeling, for example, in Peru, of being in Pisac on a Sunday, uh, and hearing Spanish and Quechua spoken, and this old tree in the plaza, and then the what was left, the stone spaces, the sacred stone spaces of indigenous people, ancient indigenous people. So maybe the Incas, or descendants or antecedents of the Incas. So Peru had that feeling of the past being right here, like the lineage of the past was so strong.
Right. I was about to ask, because obviously I can relate a lot to being in stunning nature. I wouldn't say I can relate too much yet to seeing those old ruins and standing inside of them. And so that's the feeling you get when you're there. You're really connected to these like older civilizations. What did it make you feel standing in the middle of the ruins?
Well, I think at that time, I wish at that time I was meditating. I was not meditating then. Like I would not as I do now. And the
Right.
guide I was with, her name was Gabriela, she would meditate. So she would take me to these spots. Uh, and she's like, well, let's just sit and meditate in it. And I was quiet, but I really, now it's so hard to imagine. But what I feel I felt, she would talk of this word, the apus, the mountain spirits.
Yeah.
And I've heard that. And since in other places I've been, the even in Ireland, like this belief that the stones and the trees are all animated by some things that you can feel because you are made of those things too, ancient things. We
Right.
and what when I think about how I felt, I think of this quote from Carl Sagan, who wrote a book called Cosmos.
Yeah.
In it, he has a line something like, "But every human is born with a memory of all of humanity. We're born with the memory of our history somehow. If we can remember the history of all of humans." And being in Peru in those spaces, in this very verdant, moist nature, you know, some it kind of, now when I think about it, it made me feel close to something that I didn't have words for.
Right. Um, Maybe let me ask you that question, because you just mentioned it. Is well, how can I put this? What is your spiritual belief? Because what you just mentioned, I definitely agree with as well. That we have all the knowledge inside ourselves, and if we go deep enough and cultivate it accordingly, that we can all harness this energy. But moreover, is there a spiritual belief that basically guided you throughout your life? Did something develop? Was it always there? How was your spiritual journey?
Mm. I do feel more and more it's about everything kind of, I never separated, because I've always been uh, maybe an artist, like a creative person. Uh, and I always said to myself that what I am doing is following what calls. I'm following what calls. I always had this sense of like, it's really important for me to do that. Um, like I never had the sense of you do this for money and this for something else. That sense of separation that maybe would come naturally when you live in the world and realize the world is made of this and that. For me, it was always one thing. I never learned, and now I'm still learning to separate like real life, as they say, and other lives. And more I'm seeing it all integrate, like the challenges in the world, say, of livelihood and money can be a challenge, can be an invitation to interact with mm, this spiritual world in a different way, you know, to deepen it, help integrate it. So I feel like sometimes I wonder if something is trying to remember me or I am trying to remember it. There are sometimes in those moments where I'm in nature or I'm on stage and everything is fully um, the way I describe it is when I feel inspired, I feel actually empty. Like everything is there's. I just feel like I feel clean, like but in the word Spanish, like limpia. I don't know why for whatever reason
Yeah.
I think of it that way. I feel a sense of in the sense that everything is in alignment. There's no obstacles in that moment in me. I don't feel anything stuck. Everything is flowing in the same direction somehow. And so I, I'm still trying to listen, and I feel I'm being called to be more brave and believe in unseen feelings more, like follow unseen impulses with more,
Yes.
uh,
Bravery.
just, yeah, maybe like not question it as much.
Yes. Um, so let me ask you the question about purpose and fulfillment in life. So for you personally, how would a purposeful and fulfilled life look like? And not to take anything away, but maybe what does creativity, like what role does creativity, because you mentioned you being an artist, play in that?
I feel for me, the heart of so much is the sense of playfulness. Following. I think that's what calls, because it's not like a loud voice. I think my creativity, I realize over the years, it's like how naturally it comes to me and how I've maybe in the past gotten in the way of it by trying to be very too precise about things, you know? Like, so for example, when I was starting to write fiction, suddenly I was like in my 20s, and I never thought of myself as actually an artist till I was in my 20s, say. Even even though I read a lot and was moved a lot, it was always other people who created. I was the one who received things. Like I would be inspired by a book or a song or something, but I'm not the creator, you know?
Right.
So I was like, oh, I've so much feeling. What do I do with it? And it wasn't until I began writing short stories. It was in my 20s, I suddenly made me want to take a class. So I'm taking the class and I'm learning, I'm reading as you do when you're studying, like any kind of apprentice. You're
Mm.
listening to what other people are saying to you about, this is how you do it. You, this is the structure. This is what is good writing. And this is not what is not good writing. This is the way you write a short story. A good short story looks like this. It starts like this. It has an ending like this. Let us study all the great short stories by mostly, well, anyway, no, I'm going to say, anyway, let us study the canon, as someone once said, of things, And now I will tell you what my inspiration for what poetry is, for example,
Yeah.
is the story of there is I really love her writing. She is passed now. She is a Polish Roma woman named Papuja, who wrote just I think one book of poetry, and in it, but really the story about her that I love is that she was traveling, wandering with a group with her community. And one day, as they did, actually one night, as they did every night, they stopped, made a fire, and danced and sang. And so Papuja dances and Papuja sings and is speaking. And there is a young anthropologist embedded with the community, as often happens, with indigenous people, there's an anthropologist embedded. And he notices her and comes up to her and says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm just singing what's in my head." And she says, "Do you realize that what you are singing is poetry?" And she says, "Well, what is poetry?" So she was
Right.
just doing what came naturally, right? And then he
Right.
tells her about poetry and he says, "Well, can I write it down?" And so she says, "Yes, you can write it down." And he publishes it in a book that's called Songs Out of Papuja's Head.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that for me is poetry.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, that's kind of, I think, what a lot of people would, without putting it into words, agree with as well. Like, that feeling we get when we say someone is a real artist and just feels like authentic and genuine. I think that's kind of that's, or at least I would say, what art should be, right? It shouldn't be, oh, I'm trying to produce this or I'm trying to create this, but it just kind of creates itself in a way.
At least, I think every artist has their own. There are some artists who love form, who love creating different poetic forms, and it's their gift. I think I'm
Mm.
realizing like when you were saying like what is the purpose of each, I think the purpose is finding the thing that only you can do in your own way of doing it. And I don't think it's selfish to go looking for that because the more you do something only you can do, the more you are sharing something really essential with the world. And it's actually an act not only of revolution, but an act that supports community, that helps community to grow because you are really, uh, I think it just changes how we relate to each other when we're living our purpose.
Definitely. And yes, everyone should definitely. Well, I don't know about everyone. Generalization is always hard, but I truly believe that the majority of people should and can pursue something like this and their own personal purpose. Um, you already talked a little bit about when you shared your journey there about fear and you trying to be more, well, we said brave or like open or whatever. So maybe tell us a little bit about what fear, like what role fear played in your life and maybe how that developed during your life as well, your relationship to it.
Very. It's kind of interesting. Like when I uh, when I think about it now, like for example, you know, living this city life when I was living in New York, and then suddenly going to Tierra del Fuego, for example. Like not suddenly, I had planned it, but I mean, it was like a big leap, you know?
Yes.
And it was a big, and then there was so much travel. I couldn't, it was so hard to stop. Um, and like, yeah, there was fear, and people would say to me, but you're so brave. You're traveling on your own as a woman in all these places. Cause I love traveling on my own.
Right.
I just feel you meet more people that way. I mean, every now and then you meet,
Definitely.
but I feel you really meet so many people that way because you're not, I don't know, that's just, it suits me. But I didn't feel brave because I wasn't doing something I was scared of. I think being
Yeah.
brave is doing something you're scared about. It might have been brave if they did it because, like, once I got over the newness of travel, I don't remember being really, really scared, you know? I think I was more scared of like, I'm trying to remember, like, I did, I think the kind of fear that I've been dealing with is connected to a certain kind of trauma that I don't think can speak
Right.
too much about the source of it too much. But The fear that I feel, I realize now that I've felt all my life are these felt body senses of just like fear all by itself for no reason at all.
Mhm.
That was like, that's embedded in the body, you know? So I wouldn't call it a panic attack. It would be more like, I've heard it called like an emotional flashback, you know? So you just suddenly, your stuff, you're like you feel unsafe. Those other moments I can relate to more now. And it's almost like in retrospect, I realize how many moments of those I had in all different times in my life, whether I was traveling or anything like that, and like, so in a way, my relationship with fear has shifted because I've seen the fear that's in the skin. It's almost certainly it's connected to my past, to stuff that happened in my past, in my life, this life. And I also feel it's older somehow, you know, like an animal feeling.
Right. S- So those certain kind of fears, I definitely understand what you're saying. Do you fully feel like they happen without a reason though, or do you, like looking back at it, see a connection there as well?
I do see connection there. I see particular things that happened in my past. I see, I see sort of like I I didn't I didn't believe that I could stop feeling those fears maybe, because they were so visceral.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, like it's like an animal feeling and I and it's only now that I'm beginning to work in very specific ways with breath, with memory, and kind of realizing actually like that in those fears was all this negative self-talk about that had affected my sense of possibility, of what it's possible to do in this life or in this world, you know, something like that. And
So I actually think that is something, I'm just gonna assume again, but, I do feel like a majority of people can relate. And yeah, what would you say to people that maybe feel that certain kind of unease, that certain fear, that certain, like, holding back, not, being, for whatever reason, able to achieve possibilities? Maybe they're not open to, maybe they can't really explain it, but they have that feeling, you know?
what I feel that I am doing differently to change the sense of possibility that that is, first I'm beginning to see what those voices that for that are saying, to really listen to them, to even
Mhm.
write them down, because when you feel the feeling and the voice, it becomes amorphous, right? It's just this amorphous feeling, or a voice that's like there's a tone. But then when you uh if you can stand to listen, you hear phrases, very particular things that are connected to your particular life. But it's usually the same thing, which is you're not good enough. It's some kind of negative self-talk that's like, no, you can't, you're useless, or whatever it is. But I think once you stop and let the voice speak and just listen, then you can hear what it's saying and you realize it's saying the same thing, that it's like a deep thing. That's one thing I do first, for example. I will listen. Um, and then there's other feelings that I do, which is in that moment, I come into my body because I realize that, like, I don't want my head to be, or one part of my head to be arguing with the other part of my head. It gets too mental.
Yeah.
It's too like, I mean, in my head, and I realized the feeling is in the body, at least for me. So one of the things I do is I'll start breathing and I'll start feeling my toes. I'll start feeling like the nowness of the moment. So if say it happened to me right now in the middle of speaking to you, I would just start bringing my attention into my body. I'd start feeling my breath even as I'm speaking. You know, I get like almost hyper conscious of the present.
Right.
Uh, so there's many ways. There's a really great book I've been reading about complex PTSD that's by Pete Walker, and it's called From Surviving to Thriving. And he has a toolbox that's actually on his website, this guy named Pete Walker. I really appreciate him and the things that um, that especially he has like a whole kind of toolbox of things you can do when you are in the middle of an emotional flashback. And so I think it's like building a repertoire, like a toolbox. You don't know what's going to help you, so you try different things. Uh, so it's that's one thing I do. I do that, and it's also um, then beginning to change those voices, like to begin to believe, because the other revelation I have had, mostly from reading things, is that it's the belief that needs to change first. That is to
Yeah.
say, when you believe, maybe in this way, I think with my creativity, I don't doubt that in a minute I can create a poem or I can dance if I'm moved. I don't doubt it. You said to me, "Here are 2 words and I will riff on a poem." It wouldn't matter to me if it was good or bad, I would just enjoy it.
Right.
But when it comes to some things like my capacity to make a livelihood sometimes, my capacity to take a project all the way to, I don't know, to the stage maybe that needs funding or needs to be, I don't know, I could get real stuck. And then when I realized that, like, if I believe in certain things, it changes what I see.
Yeah.
I I begin to see opportunities. It's and I begin to, I think, um and then the last part I guess I would say it is, like, sometimes you just have to be able to stand things that suck. And that's part of it. Like, the journey to beautiful things. I'd forgotten, when you're traveling, there's moments, days you're lonely. You're alone.
Yeah.
You mean, which is different than lonely. I don't mind being alone, but there's some moments sometimes you're far away from things on your own in a place where you may or may not speak the language. And you have these moments, and you just have to, that is part that is part of the journey. Like, accepting in this moment, it kind of sucks. Like, not resisting is also sometimes, I think, like, we keep thinking, well, everything has to be all love and golden, on the journey. On the journey to beautiful things, everything, it's always beautiful all the time. And I don't that's not true. Learning to travel, for example, learning to be at peace with yourself on the road, traveling alone in different places, you go through difficult times doing something beautiful.
Yes. Um, I really, yeah. Um, if you really just listen to what you said, I think there's a lot of very good things that people can take away from that. Some people, they might sound very abstract, but I really connect with them a lot, and it's so true. Um, and especially there are probably other ways as well, but I discovered for myself as well that travel is one of the um, well, I don't want to say easiest, but it's obviously a very convenient way to really find yourself and to really be, like you said, confronted with yourself. And it's a way to, yeah, get get there very quickly to discovering yourself because you're with yourself the whole time, pretty
It's
much.
true. It's true, isn't it? It's true. I think travel really speeds up. It can really speed up your evolution.
Definitely. Um, so I definitely want to talk to you about your what you mentioned, your plays and your kind of recent creative output. But before we do that, I also really was interested in Mongolia because it's just something I've never been, and I just heard it's such a wonderful country, also very nice landscapes. And maybe to most people, it's also pretty exotic, as to me, because I haven't been there. So maybe if you just want to tell us a little bit about Mongolia as well.
Sure. Are there any specific questions you have? Because I was there for a year and a half. So if you have specific questions, I
Right.
would love it. If about any
Um, so well, I'm always very interested in cultural insights. Like, what was the things that in the culture were really resonating with?
Okay. Well, Mongolia had been on my mind also. All these were all childhood dreams, that I did. Like Mongolia had also
Right.
been the steppe. The word for steppe in Mongolian is tal. And my favorite song in Mongolia, which tells you a lot, it's like a kind of a old song in Mongolia, in Mongolian, is the song that says, "My father is a horseman, mini av ado chinhun, mini av do chinhun." My father is a horseman. My father is a singer. And so it is a horse culture and it is a singing culture. Those were the two big hearts of Mongolia. How does the song is, uh, Emin Herte Mini Ava, my most beloved father, and like Herte is loved. Emin Herte, Emin Herte Mini Ava, Adoni ha belche dolta kumbesan, Baad mesnas sitkin sanakshan, Derel halatai dolta kumbesan, Mini Ava dochen hu, Mini Av dochen ho. Um, It's my favorite song, but one of the things, if you go to Mongolia, take a song and learn a song. You will
Mhm.
often be asked to sing. It will endear you to people to hear. Uh, it's really like it's like my father who was most beloved. He would go into the field, I mean the steppes kind of, and he was a holotoy. He had a voice. He had a voice, a singing voice, and so that's was my father was a horseman. My father was a singer. And so for me, there was like this such a joyful feeling of being in Mongolia. And one of the things I did, God, there were so many things in Mongolia. I spent parts of each season, the 4 different seasons in 4 different parts of Mongolia. So
Mm.
I spent the spring in a province called Hinti, and it was just yellow and windy and calving season. So many animals being born, so many uh, sheep. In Mongolia, they call tavan, the 5 hoof animals. Tavan, I God, now I
Mm.
forget the whole thing, but tav is 5. So I think it's like sheep, goats, camel, horses, cow. I think that would be the big. They also are yak, but I don't think yak is in that 5. There are yaks, and
Mm.
I milked the yak.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
I milked it. It was it's very sensitive, a yak. It does not like people it doesn't know trying to milk.
Right.
But so I spend the spring in Hinti, in the east of Mongolia. I spend the summer in a province called Khozgol, which is a very green province in the north. In the summer, Hinti, Khozgol. In the autumn, I was in the Gobi Desert, way
Lovely.
out next to a city called Dalanzadkot, but in the countryside. And then the winter I spend in the westernmost province of Mongolia, a place called Bayanolgi, which has a big Kazakh population. It's right on the border of Kazakhstan. So it's a very different, it feels different than other parts of Mongolia because you're hearing Kazakh and you're eating different kinds of foods too.
Mm,
Um, and it's very famous in the eagle, the eagle festival, the eagle hunters. You'll see that a lot in Mongolia. They're Kazakh. That happens in Bayan Olgi, where it's like people hunt with eagles. You go up. There is culturally you go and find eagles, like take them from their nests when they are young. And then
mm,
train them. And Kazakh men will go hunting. You'll see if you see often when you see very exotic photos of Mongolia, which I've seen this on Facebook and stuff. Lost tribe. No, it's not a lost tribe. There's people in Mongolia who are Kazakh who hunt with eagles. It's not that lost, but every now and then someone will forward me something. Lost tribe in Mongolia. And there's no sense of tribes in Mongolia too. It's communities and families and uh yeah, communities and families. Really, there was no sense of like tribe, this tribe and that tribe. It's uh, So yeah, that was a countryside, but I also spent a lot of time in the city, Ulaanbaatar,
right.
the capital of Mongolia. That's I would
Uh,
spend, live with the family in in the city and then go out into the countryside.
right.
Um,
So is
I,
that like the two takeaways though? Is that it's a very nature loving tribe, the horsemen, and it's a very creative tribe, the singing man.
but I wouldn't call them a tribe. I'm saying it's like a.
Oh well,
There's
no,
not a
like
sense of a tribe. Yeah, but well, yes, and also I was in Ulaanbaatar. I was in a country that had been a Soviet satellite state and was a democracy since the 90s. And being in Ulaanbaatar in that time in like 2007 was like it was like all the rules were gone. I never partied as hard as I never I would go out and dance and go to places and drink and I mean, I don't think I partied as hard anywhere as I did in Ulaanbaatar, to be honest. So, Mongolia was many things. It was wild and beautiful and true and confusing and, just because it's so far away. And for me, actually, Mongolia was where, this phrase was born that it's called "far away is close," which is really a metaphor
right.
for me for everything because that place that was so remote, suddenly then it was like family. I learned some Mongolian, I could speak in it, but also I had such beautiful connections there. And it was a metaphor for so many things. Like that person who you think you can't understand, they're closer. You have more in common than you think. That creativity that you think is so far away that you could never create, it's closer than you think, you know? All your dreams, you could say, that you think are so far away. They're closer than you think. So Mongolia was really, for me, it changed so much. It was like the biggest adventure of my life, I would say.
It sounds like that, and it sounds so cool as well that you like kind of that story about the seasons, and then you had them in different parts of the countryside and then the city life. Yeah, Mongolia definitely um has been kind of on my list as well. With Nepal being on there as well, and I definitely want to be in that kind and that part of the world at some point as well. But um, I really like the phrase you just said as well. That's kind of your um, motto, mantra, whatever you want to call it. Far away is close. Um, why, in your opinion, do you think for a lot of people they concentrate more on the far away? Why do they think it's everything is more far away than close?
Whoa. Why do we do that? I don't know, honestly. I don't know. It depends. Hmm. That's a good question. Why do we focus on the far away? Maybe I think that maybe it goes back to our human, um, like our human ancestry. Like the survival part of us, because we were tribal people, right? Humans pre-culture, say, we tribes and clans, and for our safety, there were enough people you could see what was close, but you really had to be worried about the stuff that was far away, that you couldn't see, the mystery that was out of sight, the danger. And so maybe like a sense of, because sometimes I think about things like this, like, for example, when I worry, I wonder, yes, okay, there's all these things in my family history, but maybe my very first ancestor was the person whose job it was to sleep at the entrance to the cave, right? So she
Mm.
couldn't like really sleep. She always had to be vigilant. So she's like always worrying, getting up. So that's my creative way of being like, okay, my worry is ancestral, like pre-family, like I come from. So in that same way, I don't know, maybe I
Yes.
wonder, like, maybe some of us, it was our job to keep watch for the far away part. So we're the ones who are like, who can only fixate on the far away, like, and maybe there's other people there's some people are really good at dealing with what's close by, and making everything feel like within reach. So I think it really depends
Right.
on many things, I guess.
Yes. So, yeah, now that we know that far away is close, we can concentrate more on the closeness of it all. Um, so yeah, I do want to know more about your journey into, well, I think you called it a play. So, your journey into plays, into combining poems with dance, your art with dance. You talked about the first play you did. So maybe if you want to tell us a little bit more about how you basically got into that. What was the excitement about doing it with dance? And then I'm also interested in the part that you said it's a take on colonization and how that is still around there. So maybe also tell us how that is important to you and why it was important for you to incorporate that into your art.
Mm. It all happened naturally, I have to say.
Right.
In the sense that this is what happened. So I'm suddenly I start writing poetry. I'd been writing plays. Like this is after Mongolia. Like Mongolia just opened everything. I came back. It was to the US, and like all this sort of it like kind of cleared something up. So I'm writing. I'm writing a novel. I'm working on short stories, and I start doing theater, but like directing. I adapt a play for other people to act in, and then I direct this play. So it brings me into contact with theater on the stage and like the play. So again, it's but other people on stage, not me. I'm directing, that's fine. And before that, I made documentaries. So I was behind the camera. I couldn't stand to be seen and anything like this, to be on stage and all that. No, that was nothing. I think the first thing that changed is I began studying this dance called flamenco. And maybe I'd done some salsa, in Mexico when I was there, and like I was
Right.
like, oh, okay, I like to dance, or I knew that, but flamenco was a whole other thing. I don't know why. And so one time I took this class where at the end of the class we had like a student recital. So we got all dressed up, all of us, and did choreographies on a stage. And I had never done anything like that before. I remember the moment of getting on stage the first time with a group of people, and I felt something. I felt afraid, but it was a different kind of fear. And I felt this adrenaline, and it was a different kind of adrenaline. And it was both, I don't know how to explain it, but it was like someone explained it recently. It's like a buzz. That's all I can express it like a sound. It was like a zzz, like that kind of feeling. I just felt like a zzz. Everything was like zzz.
Right.
Um, so that happens. Then I'm writing poetry. I start getting into poetry. I take classes with a teacher named Joan Logie, and she's also a very natural poet. She knows all the poetic forms, but she has a way of teaching that it's just, it really encourages you to be natural about it. So I write this poem about how every time fear arrives, I invite it to have tea, and how the drinking of tea takes me back to India, because in India at like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, everyone stops and has tea, like chai,
Mm.
in with milk and cardamom and ginger. Like different people make it differently, but the point is you stop and you have chai, right? At four or
Right.
five, like that, like that. And how in the poem I'm writing, this reminds me of the British, because we think that came from the British having tea, right?
Sounds very British.
Yeah. And it's, and like, so I started writing this poem, and who taught whom and all that kind of stuff. The Indians teach the British, it having fun with it. But
Mm.
really the poem is about fear, and I are sitting there and I'm frozen. Even when the dancers come, I say, no, no, I cannot leave. I am sitting and having tea with fear. I can't leave. Even when the stage comes, I'm like, no, no, no. And it becomes this whole song and dance, being frozen with fear. Then there's some moment where there's fear sitting like a very proper person drinking their tea, with their pinky extended like that. Then this is all the poem I wrote. I see this little ant crawling up the pinky, the finger that has extended, and the ant bites. I do this thing in the play that bites. And so fear, it kind of, it surprises fear. It releases me from the gaze, and I go running and I go dance, the dancers. Then I come back, and fear's still sitting there on the chair, and I see fear is really young now. And I take fear by the hand and invite it into the dance. And there's more that happens. Okay. So I've written this poem that I look at it, and it's like a 5-page poem or something.
Mm.
And I look at it and I go, this poem wants to be performed.
Right.
And my next question is, but who? It's like, do you want me to do this? Are you kidding me? Like this is
Mm.
what I say to the poem. Do you know who I am? I do not like to be on stage. Except for those little moments with flamenco. But I don't know, it keeps coming up. And then it, I saw an announcement for a workshop in India. I was in the US at that time. And I saw an announcement for a workshop in India on like the source of performance energy that used elements from ancient Vedic texts, which talk about theater, not the Natya Shastra. One of the Vedas, one of the ancient books of India, has to do with theater and the 9 primary emotions that every performer needs to interact with for them to be able to express themselves. And so that poem took me on a long journey of its own back to India, where I took these workshops and then
Mm.
came back. And a year after coming back, I realized that this one poem was actually the beginning of something. There was so much I wanted to talk about growing up in India till I was 12, being conscious of India having been colonized by the British and the Portuguese, the fact that English is my first language, even though I'm 99.9999% Indian, like South Asian. You know what I mean? I'm from India. I'm
Yeah.
properly Indian, more or less, you might say, or improperly. But I'm saying I grew up in India speaking English as my first language because one of the things that the British did as part of their education policy when India was colonized was they deliberately created a class of Indians who are Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, morals, intellect, and values. And it was part of the policy, part of a way of managing the chaos of India was to create a buffer class, they said, kind of that to help them govern, right? A class that would,
Mm.
that's what colonization does. It makes it different than any other kinds of invasions. Not only does it plunder, invade, destroy, take, it makes you like the colonizer. It ennobles the colonizer. It ennobles a way of being. So I grew up thinking I was better than other Indians because I spoke English well. I mean,
Yes.
and it
Let me just make that clear because that's actually very new to me. So you grew up in India and your first language was English. You were raised on English.
yes. And I'm
Yeah,
saying
I
there's
wasn't aware that that's a thing. Actually,
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a big part of the colonization of India by the British is that there's an ennobling in any places. I mean, it happened in places, say, example, where Spain went, all the major European powers that went to colonize, Spain, Portugal, I mean, everything, the Dutch, the French, um,
right?
and it's pretty standard colonization practice is that you create a class, kind of a class of people who speak the language of the colonizer, who think they are better than their own people because they speak the language of the colonizer. Because why? Because you get opportunities at first being part of that class. You're ennobled. It's pretty standard
Yeah.
colonization technique. Even I think the Romans would have done it um, in a different way. It's someone told me. I haven't studied that, but that is what happened in India. And so you see what that does. It changes how you see yourself. It
Right.
changes what you value, what you think is valuable. So I grew up like thinking it was better to speak English than it was to learn my own language. Because for hundreds of years, people had said to me, and I mean, I say that was their lineage, right? You are better because you speak English.
Yeah.
And it transfers in other ways. It transfers into like you are more beautiful because you are fair. Oh, look at that. Sorry, there's like this must be like a Zoom like thing. You put your finger up and suddenly a
And the
thing
stories.
shows. Yeah. Um, it's agreeing with me. See?
Yeah. Exactly.
Wait, for example, in boarding school in India, we would have these little contests, just like to see who was the fairest of us all. By which we mean who was the lightest skinned.
Mm.
And you might have come across this,
Oh,
and this is happens all across brown skin culture or black skin culture, but I can just specifically I can speak to brown skin culture. There used to be, there still is, there's skin bleach creams that were popular and they still are that you can that were called Fair and Lovely.
wow.
Um, if you look at still probably in the back of many newspapers, there were like the classifieds or what called the matrimonials. Okay, so in India and in like expat communities outside of India, where say a family is looking for their son or daughter to be married. So you know the way you would have a personals,
Mhm.
but it's for marriage and often taken up by the family. If you look, you might still find, actually maybe not, but you would say you would see people seeking, we're looking for, or light-skinned girl looking for blue, 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 blah, blah, blah. Or family invites proposals for their, you know, blue-eyed, light-skinned. I mean, it's very kind of amazing. And this happens all over the world. In any colonized culture, you will find these two things. Something to do with the language, the language of the colonizer being ennobled, and that transferring in many different ways, in ways that you may not expect, into how you feel about your body. How do you feel about your sense of beauty? how you feel about your capacity to interact in the world, how you need to be. So it's very like, um, yeah, I could, it's like my, all my, but I don't analyze this in my play. I dance it, sing it, joke with it, uh, make fun of it. I tell you anecdotes. So it's, because for me, that's a truer language for me. I can analyze up to a certain point and then my head starts hurting.
Mm.
So then I just have to sing and dance it, or because I want you to to feel it. It matters more for me that you feel something than you actually understand it, because I feel that experiential feeling is also something I want to help nurture in the world, which is connected to nature, right? Like we've forgotten our sense of ability to connect with our bodies, with our sense of playfulness, with our instinct, with our sense of nuance. And so it's, that's how it's all connected somehow.
Um, do you think that, and maybe it's not a black or white thing, but do you think that the goal of creativity and creating art is more to, like you said, take these topics or whatever topic it may be, but in this case, colonization topic, and make it, make people feel it and just make them aware of it? Or is it to put value on it? What do you think is in art the proprietary thing?
The feeling, the
Yeah.
feeling, because it's not just, and it's not just for people who've been colonized. For me, colonization, when you feel it, it's like a metaphor. It's a symbol for, it's just a way to begin to see the things that keep you small or that limit you. You know, it's just a beginning for me. It like was like, oh, it's like the same time when you begin to listen to those voices and be like, oh, that negative feeling is saying certain things. If I could hear what it says, I could feel what it says, you know? So it's that kind of thing. I feel, oh, creativity, the greatest gift, and I feel creativity is for everybody. As an artist, it's what I dedicate my life to. It's what I am following. It's what I lay down my life for, you know? Uh, or yeah, it's true. Like I am totally, when a poem comes, I will drop everything and follow. If a song is calling me, I will go wherever. And especially nature, I will go. You know, when the call, I that is, and so, and also I feel that everybody will benefit, does benefit from tapping into creativity, because it is our human heritage. Is one of the things that we have, like our connection to nature, sometimes don't cultivate as strongly, I feel, as we could, because it really is such, it's so helpful.
Yeah, I feel like it's the one thing that, I mean, obviously, if it gets lost, somehow it gets lost. But in general, it's a thing that lasts forever. You know, we still have to this day all this art from ancient Rome, ancient Greek, and everywhere in between as well. So, um, yeah, I definitely feel like creativity is, and I mean, even nowadays, entertainment is everywhere still. Some people might argue it lost its quality, but that's a different discussion. But so yeah, it's definitely ever present, and it's the one media that humans always had to portray all sorts of topics and discussions.
Yeah.
So, um, for you right now, you took us through this wonderful journey of your life. We got to see a lot of aspects that were important to you. And way you ended up there. Um, we also looked into you just going with the flow and just following your calling. But as you're sitting here right now, what do you think the near future has in store for you? What is it that your life is absorbed with right now?
I think I'm in a place now where I'm exploring building community where I am. That is to say, without moving, being where I am. Not necessarily, I don't know for how long, but I mean, for right now, I'm in a small town in a rural area. I write for the local paper, and it's taken
Mm,
me every week I am encountering a different part of the community and having to write about it very quickly and not, but getting to see my words on a front page every week, right? And also the people I represent, not I represent, people I interview
mm,
there too. That's very curious for me. Um, I'm teaching a creativity, a creative writing class at a tribal college here near where I live.
mm.
And I've done that since September, early September, and seeing the work grow and seeing the relationships grow, that feels new in a different way, because I think I've been so much creating community online. And because that's
Uh,
that I don't know. So I feel there's, at least right now, that's the other part. I'm really, um, and I'm like, I think I need to go slow because those fears I was describing, those new kinds of fears, those skin belief kind of fears that I feel I kind of uh, didn't fully sit down with, right? Like I invited fear in for tea, and I had tea with one kind of fear, and now there's other kind of fears, other
mm,
little. 'Cause fear is a shapeshifter, right? And
right.
so I think there's different kinds of, uh, for want of a better word, maybe that's not fear, but that I need to see that I hadn't seen. It's a certain level of negative self belief that will live in you if you don't examine it. It will just live in you like like a background noise, like white noise, like someone grumbling in the background. And but then suddenly, for whatever reason, you start paying attention to it, and you realize what that what those words are made of. And you're like, wow, do I really believe that about myself? Or have I lived with such voices saying that? Oh, maybe that's why I've gone to this threshold and stopped, you know? And maybe these voices, like seeing these negative voices that have lived in me, like sound, like I'm listening to them and like, oh, okay, what's underneath you? What's the fear underneath you? Because those voices are reacting to something. So again, it's very abstract, but then it helps me tell it like a story. Um, because that's the other thing I do believe in about creativity. I'm being creative about the way I'm telling you about traumatic things. And I think
Right.
that allows me to honor my privacy and also honor my vulnerability. And I think that's the beauty of creativity because I can say, well, what I feel like is uh, these voices are like, a whole bunch of like a little bit of thunder. There's a low rumble of thunder under my skin that I haven't paid attention to. And now I want to listen to that thunder and I want to ask it to rain so that it will kind of, that lovely feeling after the rain where the earth smells fresh and new.
Right.
That's
That's a
that's my hope.
that's a beautiful way of putting that. And I guess that's kind of a good full circle as well, because we talked in the beginning how travel and maybe if you want to call that like speeding up your life, putting yourself in a lot of new, exciting situations can help you. Obviously, slowing down can help you as well. Putting yourself in the same situations, putting yourself in a routine of sorts, and like you just described, is very helpful for these things and dealing with stuff as well.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Mike.
yeah. So I feel like we had a very nice conversation and ended up in a very good spot there. Um, so for the people that enjoyed the conversation the same way I did, and if you just want to tell us where we can find out more about you, how people can uh, look up your stuff, whatever you have present online, and then all the links I will obviously share in the description as well for people to check out.
Sure. Yeah, I have a website. It's just my name, ShabanaCoelho.com. And Coelho is like the Brazilian writer Paulo Coelho. Coelho, but they speak it differently, I think. They say the last name differently in Brazil than we do in India. So yeah, just Google me. There's not a lot of Shabanas in the world. Put in the good manners. That's it. Put in the good manners of colonized subject in Google and see
Right.
what comes up. I think you will find me that way.
Cool. So yeah, thank you, Shabana. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your journey, sharing your insights. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you for doing this. I think it's really a gift to hold space for other people to tell stories and to share that. It's a lot of work for sure. I know that. Uh, so thank you for what you do. It's important.
I appreciate that. Uh, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day and bye, everyone.